Cadet Emily Harper stood in the cold, dimly lit briefing room, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was thick with tension. General Voss, the leader of the Terran Space Force, towered over her, his crimson skin reflecting the low lights from above. His four eyes narrowed, scanning her face with a mixture of disbelief and contempt. She was young, barely out of training, and standing here in front of the most powerful military leader humanity had was enough to make anyone's knees shake. "Do you really think you can change the course of this war?" General Voss growled, his voice like gravel scraping across stone. His gaze was piercing, drilling into Emily as if trying to find some hint of weakness. Emily stood tall, not flinching. She knew the odds, the war was lost. The Varkans, the most ruthless alien species humanity had ever faced, had already crushed the last defense lines in the outer colonies. The Terran fleet was scattered, broken, their remaining ships barely able to hold off the Varkan advances. The Varkans didn't just want victory, they wanted extinction. And they had the power to make it happen. But Emily wasn't here to give up. She was here to try to fight even when everything seemed impossible. She had been handpicked for this mission not because she was the strongest or the bravest, but because she was different. She was smart, she was resourceful, and she wasn't afraid to think outside the box. "I'm not saying I'll win, sir," Emily said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "But I can stop the Varkans from wiping us out. I can turn this war around." The general raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "And how exactly do you plan to do that, Cadet?" His tone was mocking now, as if amused by the mere thought of such a young human challenging the fate of an entire galaxy. Emily didn't hesitate. "By splitting their alliances. The Varkans aren't the only power in this war. They've made enemies of the Voltaire and the Zyrex, two other powerful factions. If I can turn them against each other, weaken their unity, maybe we have a chance. It's a long shot, but it's all we've got." The general crossed his arms, studying her with a look of skepticism. "You think you can convince the Voltaire and the Zyrex to join our side? They've always been enemies of the Terrans. They're more likely to kill you than to talk." Emily knew he was right. The Voltaire were known for their cold logic and ruthless strategies. They didn't care about human suffering. The Zyrex, a warlike species of reptilian creatures, hated the Terrans with a passion, blaming them for the death of their homeworld. Convincing them to fight together, let alone against the Varkans, was like trying to make fire and water mix. But Emily had a different kind of strength. It wasn't in her hands or her muscles or even her weapons. It was in her mind. She was a strategist, a diplomat at heart. She had spent years studying the alien species that surrounded her. She understood their motivations, their fears, and their weaknesses, and she was willing to gamble everything on a single idea, that the enemy's hatred for each other was greater than their desire to destroy humanity. "I don't expect it to be easy, sir," she said, taking a step forward. "But what's the alternative? Sit back and let the Varkans crush us all." For a long moment there was silence. General Voss seemed to be considering her words. His eyes flickered, the first sign of doubt crossing his stern face. He let out a heavy sigh and uncrossed his arms, the weight of the moment hanging between them. "You're the only one who's volunteered for this mission," he said, his voice softer now, though still tinged with disbelief. "The only one who hasn't already given up. You must be crazy to think you can do this." "I've got no choice, sir," Emily replied, her voice steady, her determination unshaken. "We don't have the luxury of waiting for a miracle. This is the only shot we have." The general nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. There was a long pause before he finally spoke again, his voice carrying a note of reluctant respect. "You're right about one thing, Cadet. We don't have time. If you fail, it's over for humanity. No pressure." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat, but she didn't let her fear show. This was it. The fate of humanity was resting on her shoulders. It wasn't fair. She wasn't ready, but she had no choice. "I'll do whatever it takes, sir," she said, her words firm, her resolve unbreakable. "I won't let them destroy us." General Voss gave her a long, searching look, then finally nodded. "Then go. Prove me wrong, Harper." With that, Emily turned and walked out of the room, her heart pounding in her chest. The weight of the mission threatened to crush her, but there was no turning back now. The war was on, and somehow she had to find a way to change everything. The hallway outside General Voss's briefing room felt endless as Emily walked down its sterile, metallic corridor. Her boots echoed with each step, a reminder of the weight she carried. The air was thick with the hum of the space station around her, but in her mind, all she could hear was the pounding of her heart. She had no idea how she was going to pull this off. The Varkans were ruthless, and the Voltaire and Zyrex were no better. The odds were against her, against humanity. Everyone had written them off. The war had already been lost, and now here she was, a cadet, tasked with the impossible. But she wasn't going to back down. She couldn't, not when Earth's future was hanging by a thread. Emily made her way to the shuttle bay, where she would board a small, unarmed ship that would take her to the Voltaire homeworld. Her first destination was the Voltaire, a race known for their cold, calculating logic. They had no love for humanity, but Emily knew something others didn't. The Voltaire valued survival above all else. They would never willingly throw themselves into an alliance with the Varkans if it meant their own destruction. As she walked into the shuttle, the doors sealed behind her with a soft hiss. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her hands were shaking, but she forced herself to grip the armrests tightly. There was no room for fear now. The flight to the Voltaire system was long and uneventful. The stars outside the window flickered as the ship sliced through space, but Emily didn't notice them. She was too busy thinking, planning, preparing. The Voltaire were known for their cold demeanor and razor-sharp minds. She had to approach them carefully. They weren't like the Varkans, who thrived on fear and violence. The Voltaire respected intelligence and logic. They would never agree to a deal unless it made perfect sense. Emily had to find a way to make them see that their survival was linked to the downfall of the Varkans. When the shuttle finally entered the Voltaire system, Emily's heart rate quickened. The Voltaire homeworld loomed in front of her, a vast, silver planet with towering cities and crystal-clear oceans. It looked peaceful from the outside, but Emily knew better. Beneath the surface, the Voltaire were warriors. They fought not with brute force, but with strategy. As she approached the Voltaire capital, she could feel the weight of her mission bearing down on her. The Voltaire ambassador would be waiting for her. She would have one shot to convince them to abandon the Varkans, one shot to save humanity. The shuttle landed with a soft thud, and Emily stepped out onto the landing platform. The cold air of the Voltaire homeworld hit her immediately, a sharp contrast to the warm, recycled air of the station. She took a steadying breath and walked toward the entrance, where the Voltaire ambassador was waiting. The ambassador was tall, even taller than Emily, with sleek silver skin and piercing white eyes. He regarded her with a detached expression as she approached. "You must be the human cadet who thinks she can change the course of the war," he said, his voice smooth, almost mechanical. "Tell me, Cadet Harper, why should I trust you?" Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had known this would be the hardest part, convincing the Voltaire to even listen. But she had no choice but to try. "I'm not asking you to trust me," Emily said, her voice steady, though inside her nerves were frayed. "I'm asking you to see the truth. The Varkans are not your allies. They are a threat to everything you've built. If they succeed in destroying us, they will come for you next. The Voltaire will fall and your people will be wiped out." The ambassador tilted his head, his white eyes never leaving hers. "You have no evidence to prove this. The Varkans have been our allies for centuries." "I don't need evidence. I have logic," Emily replied. "The Varkans have already made enemies of the Zyrex and the Terrans. They are too dangerous to be trusted, even by your kind. They're using you to further their own ambitions. If you side with them, you will become their next target once they've conquered us." There was a long pause, and Emily could feel the weight of the ambassador's gaze. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment she thought he might dismiss her outright. But then something shifted. A flicker of doubt crossed his face, though it was quickly masked by his calm demeanor. "You are very bold for a human," the ambassador said, "and yet I find your argument compelling." Emily felt a spark of hope ignite inside her. She couldn't afford to let it show, though. "It's not about being bold, it's about survival. You're not just fighting for your people, you're fighting for the future of the entire galaxy. The Varkans will destroy everything if they're allowed to win." The ambassador studied her for a long moment, his white eyes piercing into hers. Finally, he spoke. "Perhaps you are right, Cadet Harper. Perhaps your logic is sound. I will speak with the High Council, but do not think this will be easy. The Voltaire are not quick to change their ways." Emily nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. She had made the first move, but the real battle was just beginning. As she left the Voltaire capital and boarded her shuttle back, she knew there was still so much more to do. The Varkans were still out there, and now she had to convince the Zyrex. But she was one step closer, and in a war where every second counted, that was enough. The shuttle ride from the Voltaire homeworld felt like an eternity. Emily sat in the small cockpit, staring out into the void of space, her mind racing. She had done it. The Voltaire had agreed to speak with their High Council to at least consider her proposal. That was something. A small victory in the grand scheme of things, but a victory nonetheless. Her heart still raced with excitement, but the weight of her next challenge quickly took over her thoughts. The Zyrex. The Zyrex were even more unpredictable than the Voltaire. They were fierce, ruthless, and hated humanity with a passion that burned as hot as the suns they had once called home. Earth had inadvertently caused the destruction of their homeworld in an unintentional conflict many years ago, and since then, the Zyrex had vowed revenge. Their warrior spirit was unmatched, and their thirst for vengeance was legendary. Emily knew she had no chance of convincing them through diplomacy alone. The Zyrex didn't negotiate, they dominated. She would have to use everything she had, her knowledge of their culture, their weaknesses, and the one thing that might make them reconsider: survival. The Varkans posed a threat to them as well, and if she could make them see that, perhaps, just perhaps, they would listen. When the shuttle finally landed in the Zyrex capital, Emily's stomach twisted with nerves. The planet was harsh, a barren landscape of cracked soil and jagged mountains. The air was thin, and the sun's light felt sharper, harsher than on any other world. She stepped out into the cold, unwelcoming environment and was immediately met by a group of Zyrex warriors. They towered over her, their reptilian eyes glowing with suspicion. Their scales shimmered in the harsh light, and their claws clicked against the stone as they moved toward her. Emily didn't flinch, though the feeling of being so small in their presence made her chest tighten. "Human," one of the warriors hissed, "what are you doing here?" "I've come to speak with your leader," Emily said, her voice calm, but her heart was pounding. She knew she couldn't show fear, not now, not with the Zyrex. The warrior growled low, but then nodded. "Follow." They led her through the twisted, steel-and-stone hallways of their city, a place that felt as cold and unforgiving as their people. Finally, they reached a massive chamber at the heart of the Zyrex capital. At the center stood Commander Cathar, a towering figure with scales like polished emerald and eyes like burning coals. His presence alone was enough to make the room feel smaller, more suffocating. "You have come," Cathar said in a voice that rumbled like distant thunder. "What do you seek, human?" Emily didn't waste time. "I need your help, Commander. The Varkans are planning to crush the Terrans and the Voltaire, but they aren't just after us. They want to take over everything, your people too. If you continue down this path of hatred, the Varkans will eventually come for you as well." Cathar's eyes narrowed. "You lie. The Terrans are weak. The Zyrex will destroy you, not the other way around." "I'm not here to ask for your mercy," Emily said, her voice hardening. "I'm here to ask for your survival. The Varkans will destroy everything, all of us, if we don't unite. They've already crushed the Terran outer colonies. They're coming for the Voltaire next, and then when they've dealt with them, they will turn their full force on the Zyrex. You know this. I know this." There was a long silence as Cathar studied her. Emily could feel the weight of his gaze, like he was measuring her very soul. "You speak of survival," he said at last, his voice a low growl. "But you speak with the blood of my people on your hands. You destroyed our homeworld. The Zyrex do not forgive." Emily's heart sank. She knew this would be the hardest part. She had to remind him that survival mattered more than vengeance. "I know," she whispered. "I know what we did, and I can never undo it, but if we don't act now, we will all die. Together, the Varkans will leave nothing but ashes." Cathar's eyes flickered with something that might have been doubt, something unfamiliar in his fierce, warrior face. "You think I would trust you after everything?" "I don't expect you to trust me," Emily replied. "I'm asking you to trust in your people. The Zyrex are warriors. I know you want revenge, but the Varkans are not an enemy you can fight alone. This is not about honor. This is about survival." Another tense silence passed between them. The air felt thick with the weight of their history, their anger, and the truth that neither side wanted to acknowledge. Finally, Cathar spoke again, his voice heavy but thoughtful. "You are a bold human," he said, his tone grudgingly respectful. "I will give you one chance, human, one chance to prove that your words hold meaning. If the Varkans truly plan to destroy us, then perhaps there is something worth considering. But know this, if you betray us, I will not hesitate to destroy you." Emily's breath caught in her chest. She had done it. She had convinced him, barely, but it was enough. For the first time since starting this mission, she felt a spark of hope flicker in her heart. "Thank you, Commander," she said, her voice steady but full of relief. "I won't betray you, I promise." Cathar turned away, his gaze fixed on the horizon outside the chamber. "Then go. We will await your message." As Emily left the chamber, her mind whirled. She had just secured the Zyrex, maybe. She didn't know if they would hold up their end of the deal, but she had given them something to fight for, something worth more than revenge. And now she had to find a way to make the Voltaire and Zyrex stand together. The Varkans were still out there, and the war wasn't over. But for the first time in a long time, Emily believed, really believed, that they had a chance. Emily stood at the edge of the shuttle bay, staring out at the vastness of space. The stars stretched endlessly before her, but it was the blackness between them that felt most suffocating. The deal with the Zyrex had been a fragile one. They had agreed, but trust was never easy for a species built on war and vengeance. She had only moments to solidify their commitment before they would turn on her, and everything she had worked for would unravel. She took a deep breath, pushing away the fear that clawed at her chest. Focus. The Varkans were still out there, still a threat that loomed over every alliance she had just made. She couldn't afford to hesitate now. If the Zyrex betrayed her, humanity would lose their last chance at survival. With a final glance at the empty stars, Emily boarded her shuttle again. This time her destination was even more dangerous than before, the Varkan stronghold. She had no illusions about the danger. The Varkans were not a people who made deals. They destroyed. They conquered. They burned everything in their path, leaving nothing behind but the rubble of their enemies. But she had a plan. She had to make it work. The shuttle rocketed through space, carrying Emily toward her destination, the heart of the Varkan Empire. She felt the tension tighten in her body with each passing second, the enormity of the task ahead of her weighing heavily on her mind. If she could make it to their capital and somehow convince the Varkans that they had no future in this war, that the cost would be too high, she could save them all. But she didn't have much time. The shuttle systems pinged with an alert as the Varkan capital came into view. The planet was massive, its surface scarred by constant war. Towering fortresses loomed in the distance, their dark spires piercing the sky. Emily's heart raced. She had never seen anything so intimidating. She was no soldier, she was a strategist, a negotiator. But even she couldn't deny the sense of dread that filled her as she entered the Varkan atmosphere. The shuttle touched down on a landing platform surrounded by heavily armed guards. As the door hissed open, Emily stepped out, her boots clicking on the metal beneath her. She was escorted through a series of cold, imposing hallways, the sound of her footsteps echoing off the walls like a countdown to something inevitable. At the end of the corridor stood a massive door. Beyond it, Emily knew, was the Varkan High Command. She had no illusions about what awaited her. She was walking into the lion's den, but this was the only way forward. The door opened with a low groan, revealing the chamber beyond. A long, metallic table stretched down the center, surrounded by towering Varkan leaders, their scales gleaming in the harsh light. Their eyes, yellow and predatory, fixed on Emily as she entered, and the air in the room seemed to grow heavier with each step she took. She didn't hesitate. She couldn't afford to. With every ounce of her resolve, she strode to the head of the table, her voice calm but unwavering. "I'm here to make a deal," she said. The room fell silent. The Varkan leaders exchanged looks, their expressions unreadable. The silence stretched on, thick and uncomfortable, before one of the leaders spoke. "You are bold for a human," he said, his voice low and guttural. "But you are also foolish. The Varkans do not negotiate, we conquer." "I'm not here to negotiate," Emily replied, her eyes locking with his. "I'm here to stop you from making the biggest mistake of your life." The Varkan leader growled, leaning forward. "You speak of mistakes. The only mistake here is that you think you can stop us. We have already crushed your colonies. We have already claimed victory. The Terrans are finished." Emily took a step forward, her breath steady even as her heart raced. She had prepared for this moment, had practiced every word, every gesture. But nothing could have fully prepared her for the sheer weight of the Varkan's presence. "Not if you keep going," she said quietly. "You've won battles, but you'll lose this war. The Zyrex will never stand with you. They will turn on you, and the Voltaire will too. You think you can control them, but they won't follow you forever. The moment you've defeated the Terrans, they will turn their sights on you. Your alliance is fragile, and you're not as invincible as you think." The Varkan's leader snarled, rising from his chair. "You dare threaten us, human." "I'm not threatening you," Emily said, her voice unwavering. "I'm telling you the truth. The moment you conquer the Terrans, the Voltaire and the Zyrex will turn on you. They're already preparing. If you don't shift your focus, if you don't make an alliance now, you will be destroyed." For a long moment, no one spoke. Emily felt the weight of their gaze, the tension hanging like a cloud in the air. She didn't back down even as she felt the pressure building. The room seemed to close in on her, and for the first time she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But then one of the other Varkans spoke, his voice surprisingly calm. "What do you propose, human?" Emily's breath caught in her throat. This was it. This was her chance. "I propose a new alliance," she said, the words coming faster now, gaining strength. "The Voltaire, the Zyrex, and the Terrans, together. You won't win this war by conquering everyone. You'll win it by surviving it." The Varkan's leader looked at her, his yellow eyes narrowing. For a long moment, Emily thought he might reject her offer outright, but then something in his gaze shifted. "We will consider your words," he said finally. "But remember this, human, if you fail, there will be no second chance." Emily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I understand." As she turned to leave the room, she knew the battle wasn't over. It had only just begun. But for the first time since stepping into this war, she felt something she hadn't before: hope. Emily's heart was still racing when she left the Varkan stronghold, her thoughts tangled in a web of uncertainty and hope. She had done it. She had planted the seed of doubt in their minds. The Varkans were thinking about her offer. That was all she could ask for, but her work was far from done. As the shuttle lifted off from the Varkan capital, Emily gazed out at the stars, her mind already shifting to the next step. The Voltaire, the Zyrex, they both had to be on board if this fragile alliance was going to hold. If the Varkans didn't turn on her, then the other factions might. She couldn't afford to wait long. The shuttle ride back to the Terran base felt like an eternity. As she landed and stepped out, the weight of the mission hit her all over again. The air was thick with tension, like everyone around her knew that time was running out. Her nerves were on edge, but she couldn't let it show. The stakes were too high. Before she could even reach the briefing room, her communicator beeped with an urgent message. It was from General Voss. "Report to the command center immediately," his voice crackled through the device. "This is urgent." Her stomach sank. She had hoped for good news, but that tone in his voice, it only meant one thing: trouble. Inside the command center, the walls were alive with the soft hum of communication devices and the harsh flicker of data screens. General Voss stood in front of a massive screen, his arms crossed, his face a mask of anger and frustration. "Sit down, cadet," he said, his voice sharp. Emily obeyed, her palms sweaty against the cold metal of the chair. She had barely sat down before Voss spoke again. "We've just received an encrypted transmission," he said, packing back and forth. "From the Zyrex, but it's not good news, Harper. They've broken our communications. They've betrayed us," Emily whispered, her heart sinking. Voss's jaw clenched. "They've allied themselves with the Varkans. The moment you left their capital, they struck a deal." Emily's breath caught in her throat. No, not after everything. She felt the ground shift beneath her. The Zyrex had promised. No, they had to have understood. "They've already begun coordinating with the Varkans, and the Voltaire are—" General Voss stopped mid-sentence, his face suddenly pale. "The Voltaire are also in talks with the Varkans." Everything inside Emily seemed to freeze. Her heart, her thoughts, her plans, everything stopped as the realization hit her with brutal force. She had been played. "But why?" Emily exclaimed, her voice shaking. "I gave them everything, Voss shot her a look of quiet frustration. "You underestimated the enemy, Harper. The Zyrex and Voltaire are using you. They saw an opportunity and they took it. They never had any intention of working with you." Emily stood up, feeling the walls close in. "No, this isn't happening. I made them believe in something. I made them believe we had a chance. The Varkans. The Varkans always had their own plans. They're playing everyone," Voss interrupted, his voice low but full of anger. "You thought you could outsmart them. You thought you could stop them from taking everything. But they've already moved to crush us, Harper, and now you've made them stronger." The weight of his words hit Emily like a physical blow. Everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for was falling apart. She had seen the alliances start to form, the glimmer of hope in her mind that she could change the tide of this war. But it was all gone, shattered. She spun toward the massive screen, the battlefield reports flashing on it like a countdown to the end. Ships were moving, fleets were shifting. But it was all too late. The Varkans had already made their move, and they were winning. "General," Emily began, her voice weak, "what do we do now?" For a long moment, General Voss didn't speak. He just stared at the screen, his face hardening. Finally, he spoke. We do what we should have done from the beginning, Cadet. We fight. We fight for Earth, for our people. The war's not over yet, but you've made one hell of a mess. Emily nodded slowly. There was no time for self-doubt now. She had failed, but she couldn't stop, not now. She took a step forward, her voice steadier than she felt. We can still stop them. If we can break the alliances, if we can turn them against each other. I have one more move left. General Voss gave her a sharp look. What do you mean? I'll go back, Emily said, her eyes burning with determination. I'll go back to the Voltaire, I'll go to the Zyrex. I'll make them see what they're doing. We can still fracture their unity. If I can do that, we stand a chance. It's not over yet. Voss studied her for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. You're either the bravest or the stupidest cadet I've ever met, Harper, but I'll be damned if you don't make one hell of a fighter. She didn't have time for his praise. She had a war to stop. With a final glance at the screen, Emily turned on her heel and marched toward the door. There was no going back. The stakes were higher than ever, and she had one chance to make things right. This time, she wouldn't fail. The next few hours felt like days. Emily barely slept, her mind racing, her thoughts swirling. The air around her was thick with tension as she prepared for her next move. She knew what she had to do. But every step she took now felt like a gamble. Each move would either make or break everything she had worked for. She was on her way to the Voltaire capital again, and this time she wasn't just a cadet trying to broker peace. She was the last chance for humanity's survival. She had already seen how fragile alliances were. Now she needed to break the ones that held the galaxy together, all while avoiding the full wrath of the Varkans, who were already mobilizing their forces. The shuttle ride felt cold, almost suffocating. Every minute that passed felt like the world was slipping further out of reach. Emily's fingers gripped the armrests so tightly her knuckles turned white. She could almost hear the voices of the Varkan commanders in her mind, mocking her for thinking she could turn the tide of this war. But she couldn't back down now. There was no other choice. As the shuttle entered Voltaire airspace, she glanced out the window at the silver planet below. The crystal cities of the Voltaire gleamed in the distance, so beautiful and serene on the outside. But Emily knew better. She had already seen the truth behind their cold, calculated facades. This would be the hardest conversation she had ever had. But she had a plan, and she couldn't let doubt take over. The shuttle descended smoothly, landing in the same landing bay as before. Her footsteps echoed in the silent hallways as she was escorted toward the central meeting chamber. The Voltaire ambassador was waiting for her, standing as stiff and unmoving as the statues that adorned the room. His white eyes flickered as she approached, a sign that he was expecting her. "Cadet Harper," he said, his voice as calm and emotionless as always. "I see you are persistent. That will either serve you well or destroy you." Emily swallowed hard but kept her voice steady. "I'm not here to waste anyone's time," she said, standing tall. "I'm here to make you see the truth. The Varkans are playing all of you. They're using you to win this war, and when it's over, they'll turn on you just like they did to the Terrans." The ambassador tilted his head slightly, the only sign of interest in his expression. "And why should we believe you, human? The Varkans have kept their promises for centuries." "That's exactly why you should be worried," Emily replied. "They've used you just like they've used the Zyrex. They've already taken everything from the Terrans. What makes you think you'll be spared when they're done with us? When they've crushed every last bit of resistance, they will turn their attention to you." For a long moment, the Voltaire ambassador didn't speak. His cold eyes seemed to weigh her every word, his mind calculating. Emily stood her ground, forcing herself not to fidget. This was her one shot. Finally, the ambassador spoke again. "And what do you propose, human?" "I propose we break the Varkan hold," Emily said. "You, the Voltaire, have the power to unite the other factions if you act now. The Varkans want total control, but you don't have to give it to them. Join the Voltaire, the Zyrex, and the Terrans together, and we have a fighting chance." The ambassador's lips twitched ever so slightly, a gesture that could have been a smile or maybe a sneer. "You would have us trust the Terrans, after everything?" "We're not asking for trust," Emily said, her voice soft but firm. "We're asking for survival. I know the Varkans will never spare anyone. If you want to live, you have to act now." She could see it in his eyes, the hesitation, the doubt. He was torn between what was logical and what was known, and Emily had no choice but to push him further. "The Zyrex are already on board. They're just waiting for the signal. If you act quickly, we can stop the Varkans before they've completely overwhelmed us. This is your chance." The room grew quiet, the tension almost unbearable. The ambassador studied her face for a long time before finally speaking. "We will consider your proposal," he said slowly. "But you must understand, human, if we agree to this alliance, there is no going back. The Varkans will not forgive us." Emily nodded. "I understand, but at least we'll be alive to fight." With a final, piercing gaze, the ambassador nodded. "You have your answer. We will move forward." As Emily walked out of the Voltaire capital, her heart was still pounding, but there was a fire in her chest. She had done it. She had gotten the Voltaire to agree to her plan. Now she needed to make sure the Zyrex followed through. Her shuttle ride back was silent, the weight of what she had just accomplished heavy on her shoulders. But in the silence, there was also something else: hope. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot. But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, Emily could see a way forward. She wasn't just fighting for Earth anymore. She was fighting for the future of everyone: Voltaire, Zyrex, Terrans, all of them. She was the spark, the catalyst, the one who had set the wheels in motion. But she was also just one person. She couldn't do it alone. She needed them all to follow through. And somehow, deep down, Emily knew they would. She wasn't ready to give up yet, not when the stakes were this high. The final battle had just begun. The days that followed were a blur of urgency and tension. Emily had set the plan into motion, but now it was a waiting game. She had gotten the Voltaire to agree, and the Zyrex had already committed. But would they hold their word? Would the Varkans retaliate before the alliances could fully solidify? Every moment felt like a countdown to something big, something irreversible. Emily had done everything she could, but she couldn't stop her mind from spinning with fear and doubt. Finally, the moment arrived. The first wave of the Varkan fleet was on its way, heading straight for the Terran system. But this time, things were different. This time, Emily had allies. The Voltaire and Zyrex fleets were positioned on the outskirts of the Varkan advance. The alliance, the fragile dream she had fought so hard for, was ready to make its move. She sat in the command center, surrounded by flashing screens and the hum of machinery. General Voss stood beside her, his face grim but focused. Emily's heart was pounding in her chest. This was it, the final confrontation. "You ready, Cadet?" Voss asked, his voice low. Emily nodded, though she couldn't hide the tremor in her hands. She had no choice but to be ready. The fate of humanity and of the galaxy was hanging by a thread. "We need to hit them hard and fast," Voss continued, his eyes scanning the reports. "We've got one shot at this. If we fail, we're done." The room was quiet except for the clicking of keys and the soft murmur of commanders giving orders. Outside, in the dark void of space, the battle was already beginning. Ships moved into position, weapons primed, shields charged. Emily could see the Varkan fleet on the radar, a massive, unstoppable force, their ships dark shadows against the stars. But she wasn't alone this time. With a deep breath, Emily turned to the communications officer. "Patch me through to the Voltaire and Zyrex fleets," she said, her voice steady despite the nerves churning inside her. The officer nodded, and within moments, the familiar faces of the Voltaire ambassador and Commander Cathar appeared on the screen, their expressions serious, but their eyes filled with something Emily hadn't seen before: trust. "This is it," Emily said, looking at both of them. "The Varkans are coming for all of us, but if we stand together, we can stop them." Cathar spoke first, his voice a low growl but filled with resolve. "We will fight, human. You have earned our respect. Let's end this." The Voltaire ambassador nodded silently, his cold eyes flickering with determination. "For survival," he said. The link cut, and Emily felt the weight of their words settle in her chest. The battle ahead would be brutal. There was no denying that. But it was a fight worth having. For their homes, for their families, for everything they had lost, this was the final stand. The first shots were fired seconds later. The battlefield exploded into chaos as the Varkans charged forward, their massive warships firing relentlessly. The Voltaire and Zyrex fleets held their ground, a wall of firepower ready to strike back. But it wasn't just the firepower that made the difference, it was the unity. For the first time in this war, the factions weren't fighting alone. They were fighting together. Emily sat in the command center, watching as the battle unfolded on the screens in front of her. The sound of explosions and the screech of laser fire filled the air. Every time a ship went down, Emily felt a tightness in her chest, but she couldn't afford to feel the weight of every loss. Not yet. "Enemy fleet taking heavy damage," one of the officers reported, his voice crackling with static. "The Voltaire and Zyrex are pushing them back. The Varkans are losing ground." The words hit Emily like a shockwave. They were winning, they were actually winning. But the battle wasn't over yet. The Varkans still had their most dangerous weapon, the Dreadnought, a colossal warship capable of devastating entire fleets with a single strike. Emily knew if they didn't stop it now, they would lose everything. Her eyes locked onto the radar screen where the Dreadnought appeared, moving through the chaos toward the heart of their alliance. "General, we need to take that Dreadnought down," Emily said, her voice firm. "Now." Voss turned to her, his face grim but filled with determination. "We've got one shot. You take the lead." Emily didn't hesitate. She had fought too hard to get here, and now she was going to finish this. "Send me the coordinates," she ordered. The fleet's fighters were already in position, but it was going to take everything they had to breach the Dreadnought's defenses. Emily's pulse raced as she boarded the fighter, her hands steady despite the pressure. The fighter launched into space, joining the swarm of ships closing in on the Dreadnought. The next few minutes were a blur of blinding light and deafening sounds. Emily's heart pounded as she weaved through enemy fire, guiding her ship closer to the Dreadnought. Her hands moved with practiced precision, every action instinctive, every decision critical. And then it happened. With a final blast, the Dreadnought's defenses gave way. The Voltaire and Zyrex fleets launched their final assault, tearing through the weakened ship, breaking it apart piece by piece. The Dreadnought exploded in a blinding flash, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. "We did it," Emily whispered, staring at the screen as the Varkans' flagship disintegrated before her eyes. The enemy fleet began to retreat, their resolve shattered. The Allied fleets, Terrans, Voltaire, and Zyrex, pressed forward, their ships cutting through the remaining Varkan forces like a blade through cloth. As the final shots were fired, and the last of the Varkan ships fled into the void, the command center erupted in cheers. The war was over. Emily stood on the bridge, her eyes fixed on the stars. The battle had been won, but the cost was high. There would be scars, physical and emotional, that would last a lifetime, but humanity had survived. They had all survived. She looked around at the faces of her allies, their eyes filled with respect. The Voltaire, the Zyrex, and the Terrans who had fought not just for their own survival, but for the future of the entire galaxy. One cadet had started it all, and one cadet had changed the fate of an entire war.